Hi class, this is Mr. Tan here and we are at Warwick Castle and we're going to conduct Operations Project Management P2. And first let's just take a look at some of the grounds of Warwick Castle. Warwick Castle in 2 hours, 2.5 hours from London. So we can see some grounds of Warwick Castle. If you saw some of my previous videos you would have seen the castle and the castle walls and the grounds and everything else in the surrounding area. But these are part of the grounds belonging to Warwick Castle. Absolutely beautiful. Lovely, beautiful garden areas, dining areas, scenic places and animals, as you can see, just roaming around quite nicely. So here we can see some animals. I'm just going to sit around here and do P2, looking at this beautiful little creature here. Looking at the question, we always start with trying to break down what we mean by the question. So the question says, prepare a continuous improvement plan based on the review and critique of operational management principles. Within an organizational context. And so prepare means to actually provide. So we've actually got to produce a continuous improvement plan based on a critique of operational management principles within an organizational context. Well, the organizational context in this case is going to be based on your assignment, and in this specific situation we're using the company McDonald's. Now with McDonald's in P1 we looked at various management principles. We looked at Taylor's scientific approach, we looked at lean production, and we also looked at continuous improvement and the different levels of continuous improvement. So obviously the first thing we need to do, before we can base and produce a continuous improvement plan, we have to base it on a critique of management principles within McDonald's. So we need to actually critique the management principles, some of the management principles like of Taylor or lean or continuous improvement. She's a pretty bird. She's lost her feathers. She's lost one of her feathers. Look, she's lost one of her feathers. You can see there. She was eating a little bit of bread, but now I think she's actually finished her bread. So, thank you. Oh well. So, when we're preparing a plan, we must first critique various management principles. Now, you might actually think that this is quite similar to P1 in terms of critiquing the implementation of Taylor's scientific approach. So in P1, they're talking about when you're actually implementing Taylor's approach, what is the good and bad about this, critiquing it. But in this one, in P2, we're looking at critiquing management principles in general terms. We're not looking at critiquing the implementation of it. So there is a distinct difference between the implementation and the management principle itself. Okay, so there is a distinct difference there. Okay, so let's just do a quick review of Taylor's scientific principle. Taylor's scientific principle is saying, Taylor was born in scientific principle in the 1800s, and he was saying that trying to reduce the time a worker takes to undertake a specific task, and in order to do this, he said, study the jobs, what's been done, and determine ways to do it. Codified those new methods into rules. so that workers knew that they would do it in these different stages with these rules in mind. And then you would select workers appropriate to those skills for that task. And then finally you would establish levels of performance and pay linked to that performance. So, critiquing, looking at this, we can see that with Taylor's scientific approach, it was very good because you looked at the way to do it, and you said, well, how can we codify it so everyone does it the same way, the way we want it done. The good thing about this, if we were going to be critical, is that it maintains standards, so you maintain a certain level of standard. And if we relate this to McDonald's, we can see that McDonald's standards are actually quite high in terms of how they clean, how they produce their food, how they work, and everything that they actually do, simply because they have undertaken Taylor's scientific approach and codified each method of actually doing their approach. So from that perspective, Taylor's scientific approach is very good. But from another perspective, Taylor's scientific approach in terms of all the tasks, in terms of preparing food for McDonald's, is not so good because you have a high turnover of staff, and staff leave simply because one of the biggest things that this does is it tells a worker how to do it, but it's very boring and it's very mundane. And because it's very boring and because it's very mundane, you have high levels of dissatisfaction between staff. And if you have high levels of dissatisfaction, staff may stay there for a little while and then they will predominantly move on. Well, if a member of staff has to be trained and recruited and invested in, and then they leave, and you have to recruit another member of staff, well, the biggest critical thing about Taylor's approach is that you can have a high turnover of staff, which can cost the company more money in the long term in terms of doing these activities, in terms of training, recruiting and induction, and then only for the member of staff to leave again after a certain amount of time because they're not very happy. You have obviously lean. Lean is another management principle, and if you review lean, lean is about reviewing ways of cutting costs and becoming more efficient and systematic. The approach is identifying and eliminating waste, and waste can be in a number of ways. Oh, little flies around here. Waste can be in a number of ways, which includes defects, waste in terms of waiting, waste in terms of the processes that take place that may not be efficient, waste in terms of underutilizing people, waste in terms of having too much stock when you've got stock sitting around not being used, waste in terms of owner production. So again, lean, looking at ways to eliminate waste. But you can look at ways of eliminating waste, but if you never invest the money and you're not really serious about lean and these production processes, then you're never really going to do it. If you're not serious about staff training, if you're not serious about investment into people, if you're not serious about having a top level management in terms of cutting waste because they can see the benefit of it in the long term, then you will never really get lean implemented. You may get it implemented in short spurts and stops and starts, but it will never be implemented in the company unless it comes from the top management, I would suggest. And then the last one we looked at was continuous improvement, and continuous improvement on the 5 different levels. Level 1 with no formal structures, just happens. Level 2 with structured, formal, continuous improvement, use of participation. Level 3, kind of like all of the above, but with strategic goals. Level 4, all of the above, but you've got a specific unit of people who are geared towards trying to implement continuous improvement. And then really the top level is really where it comes from the top down, and the continuous improvement becomes a way of life. But again, I don't know, unless you have the top level of continuous improvement group of people doing it at the top, then it will never be implemented. And unless you have, management at the top who are serious about it and know what they're doing in terms of continuous improvement and believe in it, how will they ever invest money into training, into staff, and see the importance of this in terms of cutting costs and cutting waste and becoming an efficient company in all areas of the organization, not just in one department, but in all areas across the different functions and the different departments of the company. So obviously you need to look at the advantages and disadvantages of doing these. We've looked at Taylor's scientific method, but the thing about continuous improvement, you do need a lot of time and money and investment, and it does need to come from the top. And you may not always get it right in the first place. So again, you need to critique these. And then you need to make a critique of this in relation to McDonald's, and then come up with a continuous improvement plan in one area, I would suggest. If you try and take a continuous improvement plan of a whole company, it can be very difficult. So I would probably suggest you to take a continuous improvement plan of one area. So if we took one area, for instance, McDonald's and their customer service. So when you go in and you order food. So, the first thing you must do is to identify your clear aims and objectives in terms of your plan.